3 days. That's how long it had been since I'd heard my daughter's voice. It's a strange measurement of time, 72 hours. It can feel like the blink of an eye, a long weekend passing in a blur of errands and sleep. Or it can stretch into an eternity, each silent second coiling tighter in your gut. For me, it had become an eternity of unanswered calls and unread text messages and a growing knot in my stomach that no amount of rational explanation could untie. On the first day, I was the very picture of patience. I told myself she was just busy stirring an extra spoonful of honey into my morning tea, as if the sweetness could somehow soothe the bitter seed of worry already taking root. Rachel's always been terrible about checking her phone, I murmured to the empty kitchen, the sound of my own voice a flimsy reassurance against the profound silence on the other end of the line. She was a junior partner at one of the top law firms in the state, a rising star who lived and breathed case law and client emergencies. Of course she was busy. It was a simple logical explanation. By day 2, the excuses sounded hollow even to my own ears. The logic had begun to fray, worn thin by the constant unanswered ping of my outgoing messages. My daughter might forget to call back for a day that was true. She might get lost in a complex deposition and let her phone die. But 6 missed calls. A dozen texts, each one more transparently worried than the last, all met with the same digital void. That wasn't like Rachel. Not my Rachel. Not even during her most demanding, all-consuming cases at the law firm, the ones that left her exhausted and running on caffeine and sheer willpower. There was always a quick, swamped love you call you tonight text. Always something. The absence of that something was a weight pressing down on me, heavy and formless. On the third day of silence, I found myself standing in my kitchen phone, clutched in my hand like a talisman that had lost its magic. I was staring at her contact photo, a picture of her smiling on her wedding day, as if my focus alone could will her name to appear on the screen with an incoming call. The small blue dots, next to my last message, remained stubbornly unchecked, a stark, undeniable confirmation that my words, my worries, my love hadn't even reached her. And that's when the carefully constructed dam of rationalizations finally broke. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, a cold primal certainty that courses through a mother's veins when her child is in danger, a silent alarm that rings across any distance. Enough, I muttered the word, a sharp crack in the quiet house. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door. The familiar jingle, a sudden call to action. At 62, I had spent the better part of my life, 35 years to be exact, as an attorney specializing in domestic violence cases. I'd retired a few years back, hoping for quiet days and time with my daughter, but you never truly retire from that work. It seeps into you. It teaches you to see the hairline fractures in a perfect facade, to hear the unspoken fear behind a carefully chosen phrase. Most of all, it had taught me to trust my instincts, to listen to that quiet, insistent voice that warns of unseen dangers. And right now, every single instinct I possessed was screaming at me. The 40-minute drive to Rachel's upscale suburban home felt interminable, a torturous crawl through a world that was moving at a normal pace while mine had screeched to a halt. I tried her number twice more on the road, my thumb pressing the call button out of sheer desperate habit. Each time my heart leaped with a frantic hope, only to plummet, as her cheerful, professionally recorded voicemail greeting answered, instead of her actual voice. The sound of it, so full of life and confidence, was a cruel counterpoint to the chilling silence that had followed. I tried her husband Ethan too, but his phone went straight to voicemail, not even a ring. The efficiency of it was somehow more unnerving than Rachel's unanswered calls. Rachel's house sat back from the street, a tasteful colonial with impeccable landscaping, every shrub perfectly trimmed, every flower bed meticulously weeded. It was, in short, a perfect reflection of Ethan. My son-in-law was nothing if not meticulous about appearances. It was a quality I had once admired in him, interpreting it as discipline and ambition. But over the past few years, I'd started to see it differently. I'd watched with a growing sense of unease as Rachel gradually transformed herself to fit his exacting standards, sanding down her vibrant, wonderfully imperfect edges to match his smooth, polished surfaces. I pulled into the driveway, my tires crunching on the pristine gravel. A small wave of relief washed over me when I saw Rachel's sensible sedan parked in its usual spot. Ethan's sleek black Mercedes, however, was missing. Good. For a moment, I allowed myself to think that maybe this was all a misunderstanding, a fight perhaps, and that I could speak with my daughter alone first without Ethan's moderating presence. My knocking on the heavy oak door echoed unanswered. I knocked again, louder this time, calling her name. Silence. On a desperate whim, I tried the ornate brass doorknob, fully expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it turned easily in my hand. The door swung inward, revealing the silent, shadowed foyer. A chill that had nothing to do with the crisp October air ran down my spine. No one in this neighborhood left their doors unlocked. Rachel! I called out, my voice sounding small and thin in the cavernous entryway. Honey, it's Mom. Are you home? The house felt wrong. It was more than just quiet. It was still unnaturally so. It was too perfect. There was no half-finished coffee mug on the granite counter, no laptop open on the dining room table, where Rachel usually spread out her work in a chaotic but productive mess. The pristine surfaces looked untouched, as though no one had lived there for days, a museum exhibit of a life rather than a life itself. I walked into the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood, and my eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of my daughter. That's when I saw it. Lying on the cold tile floor, half hidden by the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator, was Rachel's cell phone. I bent down and picked it up. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of cracks radiating from the corner. The battery was dead. My heart began to pound, a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. My daughter was never ever without her phone. Not since she'd made junior partner a role that demanded her constant availability to clients at all hours of the day and night. For her phone to be here broken and dead on the floor, something was terribly wrong. With a growing sense of dread, I moved methodically through the rest of the house, my old professional instincts taking over, forcing me to be systematic when all I wanted to do was scream her name. Each room was a testament to Ethan's obsession with order. The master bedroom was immaculate, the bed made with perfect hospital corners. There were no clothes strewn about, no shoes kicked off in a corner. In the adjoining bathroom, Rachel's toothbrush stood bone dry in its porcelain holder. It felt like a hotel room after housekeeping had been through sterile and impersonal. But when I opened her walk-in closet, my analytical mind registered a discrepancy. There was a gap, a space where something should have been. Rachel's small overnight bag was missing, along with what looked like a few casual outfits and a pair of jeans. Had she gone somewhere, a trip? But why would she leave without her phone? None of it made sense. The pieces didn't fit. I returned to the kitchen, my mind racing. I plugged her damaged phone into the wall charger, my hand shaking slightly as I fumbled with the cord. Then I waited, my entire being focused on that small, broken screen, praying for it to give me an answer. The minutes stretched on thick with an agonizing, silent tension, as I waited impatiently for the phone to gather enough charge to flicker back to life, to tell me the secret of the last 3 days. When the screen finally flickered to life, it was like a gasp of air after being held underwater. A cascade of notifications flooded the display, a digital testament to my frantic one-sided conversation over the past 3 days. There were my 16 missed calls, my 24 text messages, their preview text showing a heartbreaking progression from casual, "Call me when you have a sec," to worried, "Rachel, please just let me know you're okay," to outright pleading, "I'm getting scared. Please, honey, call me." There were several alerts from her office emails and missed calls from her assistant Tanya. But as I scrolled through the lock screen, a chilling absence became apparent. There was nothing from Ethan. Not a single call, not a single text in the past 4 days. A husband who hadn't contacted his wife in 4 days. The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. My eyes scanned the call log, searching for anything, any clue. And then I saw it. The last outgoing call from Rachel's phone placed 3 days ago to a number I didn't recognize. My hand shook slightly as I pressed redial, my thumb hovering over the green button for a heart-stopping second before I committed. The phone rang once, twice, and then a crisp, professional voice answered, a voice utterly devoid of the emotion churning inside me. University Medical Center. How may I direct your call? My own blood went cold. The world seemed to drop out from under me, leaving me suspended in a dizzying, terrifying void. I'm sorry. I stammered, my voice a stranger's, thin and reedy. I was trying to reach my daughter. She called this number recently. This is the main hospital line, ma'am. The operator said, her tone patient but distant. Was your daughter admitted as a patient? 20 minutes later, I was running through the hospital parking lot, my purse banging against my hip, my heart hammering against my ribs with a force that felt like it might break them. At the main reception desk, I struggled to keep my voice steady, to project the calm authority I'd spent a lifetime cultivating in courtrooms. My daughter, I began, the words catching in my throat. Rachel Blackwood, I need to see her immediately. The receptionist's expression softened with a practiced professional sympathy that I found almost unbearable. Are you family? I'm her mother, Margaret Hayes. After a few agonizing moments of verifying my identity, she directed me to the surgical intensive care unit on the 4th floor. The elevator ride was a blur, a slow, torturous ascent through a personal hell of my own making. My mind raced through 1,000 horrifying scenarios, each worse than the last. A car accident, a violent attack, a sudden catastrophic illness. The sterile, quiet hum of the ICU was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. A nurse at the central station looked up as I approached, my face clearly betraying the frantic terror I felt. Mrs. Hayes, she asked, her voice gentle as she rose from her chair. We've been trying to reach someone from Rachel's family. What happened? I managed to ask, my own voice barely a whisper, afraid of the answer yet desperate to know. She's been here for 3 days, the nurse began, her expression grave. She was brought in for emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix. Unfortunately, there were complications. It had developed into a severe infection. She went septic and we had to place her in a medically induced coma to stabilize her condition. The room tilted slightly, the polished floor seeming to shift beneath my feet. A coma. The word was a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. My God, I gasped. Why wasn't I notified? The nurse frowned, a flicker of confusion in her eyes as she checked the chart. Her husband was notified immediately. He's listed as her primary emergency contact. And where is he? I demanded, a cold, sharp-edged anger beginning to cut through the fog of my shock and grief, though I already suspected the answer. Her expression told me everything before she even spoke the words. Her gaze dropped, a subtle shift that communicated a world of professional judgment and personal pity. He called to check on her condition yesterday, she said carefully. But he said he was in Las Vegas and couldn't get back immediately due to some kind of business emergency. Las Vegas. Business emergency. The words ignited something cold and hard inside of me, a fury so pure and absolute it burned away the tears. My daughter was in a coma fighting for her life and her husband was in Las Vegas. May I see her now? I asked, my voice suddenly steady, eerily calm. Rachel lay perfectly still and pale against the crisp white hospital sheets, a fragile island in a sea of tubes and monitors that beeped and whirred around her like some macabre technological garden. Her face thinner than I remembered, it looked so young and vulnerable in the stillness of unconsciousness. I reached out a trembling hand and gently brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead. As my fingers grazed her skin, I noticed it, a faint yellowish-purple remnant of a bruise nestled near her temple, partially hidden by her hairline. It was old enough to have faded, but new enough to be unmistakable. It was the final damning piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. "Oh, Rachel," I whispered the words, a raw ache in my throat. "What has he done to you?" As if on cue, a text alert chimed from the purse still slung over my shoulder. I glanced down, my heart seizing when I saw Ethan's name on my screen. "Just heard about Rachel on my way back from business trip," the text read. How is she? Attached was a selfie of him in what appeared to be an airport lounge, his handsome face arranged into an expression of appropriate concern. But my lawyer's eyes, trained to see every detail, every inconsistency, caught the reflection in the large window behind him. It was faint, but undeniable, the glittering, unmistakable sign for the Bellagio Casino. In that single crystalline moment, everything fell into place. The suspicion that had been a low hum in the back of my mind for the past 2 years, ever since Rachel started canceling our lunch dates at the last minute, ever since she started wearing long sleeves in the summer and making flimsy excuses for unexplained injuries, it all solidified into a terrible, unshakable certainty. He was lying. He had been lying all along. With one last lingering look at my unconscious daughter, I stepped out of the room, my movements stiff, my resolve hardening into steel. I pulled out my phone and made a call I had prayed I would never have to make. When a familiar, trusted voice answered on the other end, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "It's Margaret," I said, my voice low and cold as ice. "I need you to execute the agreement now." There was a careful pause on the other end of the line. "Are you certain, once we start, there's no turning back?" I looked back through the glass window at my daughter lying broken and alone in that hospital bed. "My daughter is in a coma while her husband parties in Vegas," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion except a chilling finality. "Yes, I'm certain." "I'll activate the team, 24 hours," came the reply. I ended the call and returned to Rachel's bedside, taking her limp, cool hand in mine. "I promise to protect you," I whispered, leaning close to her ear. "The day you were born, I promised, and this time I won't fail." I spent that night in a sterile, uncomfortable chair beside Rachel's bed, the rhythmic beeping of machines becoming the soundtrack to my vigil. It was a symphony of survival, the steady pulse of the heart monitor, the soft whoosh of the ventilator, the quiet drip of the IV. I listened to it all, keeping my own frantic track of my daughter's vital signs, as if my focused attention could somehow anchor her to this world. Nurses came and went in a quiet ballet of efficiency, their faces a blend of professional calm and human kindness. They checked monitors, adjusted IV bags, and recorded measurements on the chart clipped to the foot of the bed. They offered me blankets. I didn't feel the chill through coffee I barely tasted, and sympathetic smiles that felt both comforting and profoundly inadequate. I accepted the coffee, the bitter warmth, a small shock to my system, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Sleep felt like a betrayal, a surrender to the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. Instead, I studied my daughter's face, tracing the familiar lines with my eyes, searching for the vibrant, fiercely confident woman I had raised. Rachel had always been formidable, a force of nature. She'd graduated top of her class at Stanford Law, a whirlwind of intelligence and ambition that culminated in her making junior partner at Morrison and Klein by the age of 30, an almost unheard-of achievement. Yet somewhere along the way, after meeting Ethan at a firm charity event 5 years ago, that brilliant fierceness had begun to dim the light in her, slowly, almost imperceptibly turned down. I remember her calling me the day after she met him, her voice bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "We met when he outbid everyone for my charity auction dinner." She'd told me, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Mom, he paid $10,000 just to have dinner with me." I had been impressed, then charmed by the sheer romance of such a grand gesture. It seemed like something out of a movie, a handsome, successful man so captivated by my daughter that he was willing to spend a small fortune for a single evening with her. Now sitting in the cold, fluorescent glow of the ICU, I wondered if that extravagant bid hadn't been the first glaring red flag. A man who viewed money not just as a tool, but as the ultimate solution to everything, including the acquisition of a beautiful, accomplished wife to hang on his arm like a trophy. My phone vibrated against the hard plastic of the chair at exactly 6:17 a.m. The screen lit up with a text from a number I knew by heart, but had saved under a bland, anonymous name. It was from Detective Samantha Reeves, a woman I had once represented in a brutal domestic case who had since become a trusted friend and a vital part of the contingency plan I'd quietly built. "Team activated. Initial surveillance in place. Need all access points to accounts and property." I'd prepared for this dreadful possibility 2 years ago. It was after Rachel had shown up to our monthly lunch wearing expensive sunglasses indoors. Her explanation about an embarrassing collision with a cabinet door ringing false in my ears. I hadn't believed her then, not for a second, but I saw the panic in her eyes, the desperate plea for me not to press, not to make her say the words aloud. So I'd played along. I pretended to accept her increasingly thin explanations for canceled plans and mysterious bruises, all while quietly putting these very contingencies in place. Some might call it paranoia, a mother's overactive imagination. I called it 35 years of experience representing women who never saw the true danger until it was far, far too late. At 7:30 a.m., a Dr. Patel arrived to check on Rachel. He had a kind face, but his expression was carefully neutral as he examined her charts and listened to her chest. "How is she?" I asked, standing to stretch legs that had gone stiff and numb from sitting for hours. "Stable," he replied, his gaze still on the monitors. "The infection is responding to the antibiotics, but it was quite severe when she arrived. The peritonitis was advanced. Has she complained of abdominal pain recently?" "I don't know," I admitted, and the words tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. "We haven't spoken much lately." How had I let that happen? How had I let the distance between us grow so wide? Dr. Patel frowned, a small crease appearing between his brows. According to her admission notes, she reported experiencing significant pain for nearly 2 weeks before collapsing. That's an unusually long time to ignore the symptoms of appendicitis. It must have been excruciating. I thought back to Rachel's last-minute cancellation of our lunch 3 weeks ago, her text citing a sudden stomach bug. Had she been in agony even then, forcing a smile into her words while her body was screaming, "Her husband"? I began choosing my words with the precision of a cross-examination. "He mentioned being away on business. Do you know if he was here when she was admitted?" The doctor hesitated, a flicker of professional reticence warring with human concern. "I really shouldn't discuss this, but given the circumstances..." "No, she was alone when the ambulance brought her in. The EMT report says she called 911 herself after collapsing at home." My fingers curled into tight fists in my pockets. "And has he visited at all?" "Not that I'm aware of." Dr. Patel's professional demeanor slipped slightly, then revealing a flash of unambiguous judgment. "Mrs. Hayes, is there something I should know about your daughter's home situation? Any reason she would delay seeking critical medical care?" I considered how to respond. If my darkest suspicions were correct, I needed allies within these hospital walls. But discretion was equally crucial. I couldn't afford to show my hand too early. "My son-in-law travels frequently for work," I said carefully, my tone measured. "I'm just trying to understand the timeline of events." Dr. Patel nodded clearly, unconvinced but unwilling to press the issue further. "We'll begin the process of reducing her sedation later today," he said, shifting back to medical facts. "If all goes well, she could start to regain consciousness within the next 24 to 48 hours. After he left, I stepped into the hallway, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling my lungs, and made another call. "Alex, it's Margaret Hayes." Alexander Chen had been my law partner for 20 years before my retirement. A man whose mind was as sharp as a scalpel and whose loyalty was absolute. "I need a favor." "Name it," he said without a moment's hesitation. "I need you to prepare emergency guardianship papers for my daughter Rachel Blackwood. She's currently incapacitated, and I have reason to believe her husband may not be acting in her best interests." His sharp intake of breath was audible over the phone. "Margaret, that's a serious step, especially given Ethan's position and his family's connections. He'll fight it." "I know," I said, my voice hard, "but I need to be able to make medical decisions for her, and more importantly, I need to protect her assets if what I suspect is true." "I'll have the papers drafted and ready for a judge's signature within 2 hours," he promised. "But Margaret, a temporary guardianship is one thing. If you're building a case against Ethan, you'll need substantial, irrefutable evidence." "That," I assured him, my gaze drifting back to Rachel's still form through the glass, "is being handled." My next call was to Rachel's assistant at the law firm. Tanya was a sharp, fiercely loyal young woman who had always struck me as more of a trusted confidant to my daughter than a subordinate. When she answered, her voice was a hushed, anxious whisper. Mrs. Hayes, I was just about to call you. I've been so worried about Rachel. I didn't waste time. How long has she been out of the office, Tanya? She called in sick last Monday. Tanya said her words quick and clipped with worry. Said she had a stomach bug. But when she didn't come in on Tuesday or answer any of her emails, I started trying her cell. I couldn't reach her. I finally called the house on Wednesday and Mr. Blackwood answered. He said she'd gone to visit a friend out of state who was having a personal crisis. Her voice turned bitter, the professional veneer cracking to reveal raw anger. I knew he was lying. I just knew it. Rachel would never ever just disappear without telling me. We have a system. She would have texted. The casual, easily dispensed lie Ethan had told her assistant sent a fresh wave of cold fury through me. He wasn't just absent. He was actively constructing a false narrative, building a wall of deception around my daughter's disappearance. Tanya, I need you to think carefully. I said, my voice low and urgent. Have you noticed anything unusual about her behavior recently? Any changes in her routine? Unexplained absences? Anything at all? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that speaks of someone carefully considering what they can or should reveal. She's been different, Tanya finally said, her voice dropping even lower, as if she were afraid of being overheard even now. For the past few months, quieter, more withdrawn. She started wearing a lot more makeup than usual, and long sleeves even when it was hot outside. The classic signs. My heart sank. And she'd get these calls that would make her face go pale and she'd have to leave the room to take them. From Ethan, I pressed. I don't think so, she said. The one time I overheard a little before she saw me. She was whispering and she sounded scared. She said, "He'll know if the money's missing." Then she saw me standing in the doorway and hung up immediately. She looked terrified. A chill, sharp and deep, pierced through me. The money. It always came back to the money. Control, isolation, financial abuse. The pattern was textbook. A grim checklist I had gone over with hundreds of clients. To hear it applied to my own daughter was a unique form of torture. Tanya, I need you to do something for me. I said, my decision made in an instant. It's extremely important and it needs to stay just between us. Anything for Rachel? She said, her fierce loyalty a small beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. I need copies of any documents she might have locked in her office, especially financial records, emails between her and Ethan, personal notes, anything she kept secure. Tanya's voice was a barely audible whisper when she confessed, I have a key to her personal filing cabinet. She gave it to me last month. She made me promise to use it only in an emergency. Her voice broke slightly. She seemed so scared when she gave it to me, Mrs. Hayes. I should have done something. My own throat tightened with a grief so profound it almost choked me. This qualifies as an emergency, Tanya, I said softly. Get those documents. Bring them to University Medical Center. And please don't tell anyone where you're going. As I ended the call, another text message arrived, this one from Samantha's surveillance team in Las Vegas. The words on the screen were stark, clinical, and utterly damning. Vegas team reports subject heavily intoxicated at Bellagio poker tables. Down approx. 30K. Female companion, present not his wife, surveillance continuing. I closed my eyes briefly, leaning my head back against the cool, sterile wall of the hospital corridor. I pictured him there, bathed in the artificial glow of a casino, a drink in one hand and chips in the other, a stranger beside him, while his wife lay in a coma 1,000 miles away. Each new piece of information wasn't just a clue. It was a confirmation of my worst fears, a brick in the wall of a monstrous reality. The Rachel I knew, the strong, brilliant, take-no-prisoners woman I had raised, would never have tolerated such a grotesque betrayal. Which meant the Rachel I knew had been systematically dismantled. She had been isolated, manipulated, and broken down piece by agonizing piece, until she no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. I had seen it hundreds of times with my clients. It was the slow, insidious erosion of self. It started with a criticism, then a demand, then a threat, veiled as a joke. It was the gradual isolation from friends and family, the constant gaslighting that made a woman question her own sanity. Strong, intelligent, successful women reduced to trembling shadows of their former selves by calculating predatory abusers who specialized in the art of soul-crushing control. The thought of my brilliant daughter, my Rachel, trapped in that living nightmare, made my blood boil with a righteous maternal fury that was terrifying in its intensity. When I returned to Rachel's room, a nurse was adjusting her IV drip. "We're starting to reduce her sedation," she explained with a gentle smile. "It's a gradual process. We just watch and wait." I nodded, my mind a million miles away, already plotting, strategizing, preparing for the war that was to come. I took my place in the chair beside the bed again, my gaze fixed on my daughter's peaceful, unconscious face. "I'll be here when she wakes up." I said as much a promise to myself as to the nurse, and I silently added a vow forged in the cold fire of my rage, "and this time I'll be ready for him." I would gather my evidence, I would marshal my allies, and I would build a fortress around my daughter that Ethan Blackwood, with all his money and all his charm, would never again be able to penetrate. The fight of my life was just beginning. By noon, the hospital room had transformed from a place of helpless waiting into my command center. The constant rhythmic beeping of the monitors had faded into the background, becoming the steady drumbeat to my war preparations. Alexander had arrived, his face grim, but his actions efficient, with the emergency guardianship papers. A sympathetic judge, an old friend from my days, arguing in the trenches of family court, had signed them on an emergency basis, granting me the legal authority I so desperately needed. Not long after, Tanya had appeared like a nervous ghost, delivering a thick manila envelope stuffed with the contents of Rachel's locked filing cabinet. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and worry as she squeezed my hand before leaving her whispered words, a confirmation of the toxic environment my daughter had been living in. "She's been acting strange for months," Tanya had whispered, her gaze darting toward the closed door. "I should have said something sooner." "This isn't your fault," I assured her, the words a familiar refrain from my professional life. I recognized the misplaced guilt I had seen in countless friends and family members of abuse victims, the quiet torment of hindsight. Abusers are skilled at isolating their targets. It's what they do. Now, as I spread Rachel's documents across the small, sterile hospital table, a grim and chilling picture began to emerge. Bank statements showed a pattern of large, unexplained cash withdrawals from their joint accounts over the past year, thousands of dollars vanishing at a time. Credit card statements revealed charges for luxury hotels and expensive restaurants in cities where Ethan had claimed to be on grueling business trips, always with duplicate charges for meals and entertainment that strongly suggested he wasn't dining or traveling alone. But it was the life insurance policies that made the blood in my veins run cold. Rachel had a standard policy through her law firm, a sensible plan for a young professional. But tucked away in her files, I discovered another one, a policy Ethan had taken out, an additional $3 million policy on her life just 6 months ago, with himself as the sole beneficiary. The paperwork bore Rachel's signature, but as I studied it, something felt profoundly wrong. The loops of her letters were too precise, the pressure too even, and careful, as if someone had taken their time to meticulously copy her elegant handwriting, rather than signing it with her usual confident flourish. My phone vibrated on the table, a text from Samantha, cutting through my horrified focus. "Subject checked out of Bellagio. Flight to Boston departs 2:30 p.m. Vegas time. Estimated arrival 11:15 p.m. Eastern. Our people will maintain visual contact." So he was finally coming home, the king returning to his castle. I wondered what had prompted his sudden departure. Was it a flicker of genuine concern for his comatose wife, or the calculated fear that his extended absence might begin to raise questions he couldn't answer? As I continued sorting through the mountain of documents, a single folded piece of paper slipped out from between two bank statements. It was a handwritten note in Rachel's distinctive flowing script dated 3 months earlier. The words on the page made my heart stop dead in my chest. "If anything happens to me, the flash drive is in my blue earring box back corner under the felt. The password is Sophie June 2011. Mom will understand. My breath caught in my throat. Sophie, June 2011. The password referenced my younger sister Sophie, who had died in June of 2011 after spending years trapped in a brutal, abusive marriage. It was her death that had been the catalyst for my entire career, the tragedy that propelled me into specializing in domestic violence law, a penance and a promise I made to her memory. Rachel had chosen a password she knew only I would recognize, a secret handshake, across the years a message of shared grief and understanding. She had been leaving me breadcrumbs. My brilliant, resourceful daughter had recognized the mortal danger she was in, even if she couldn't bring herself to voice it, to ask for help directly. She had been creating a trail for me to follow in case the worst happened. I called Samantha immediately, my voice tight with a new terrifying urgency. "I need someone to retrieve a flash drive from Rachel's house," I said, forgoing any preamble. "It's hidden in her jewelry box, a blue earring box." "On it," Samantha replied, her tone all business. "Anything else?" "Yes. Ethan's flying back tonight. I want full surveillance on him from the moment his plane touches down, and I need his full financial records. Not just their joint accounts, but anything held in his name alone, any shell corporations, any hidden assets." "Already working on the financials," Samantha assured me. "My contact at First Boston is pulling his records as we speak. We should have everything by morning. The life insurance policy verification is still pending. Insurance companies move slowly, even for ex-cops." I hung up and turned back to Rachel. Her color seemed slightly better than it had that morning, a faint flush returning to her pale cheeks. The nurse had explained that as they continued to reduce the sedation, she might begin to show subtle signs of consciousness. Soon a flicker of an eyelid, a twitch of a finger, small responses to stimuli. I took her hand, running my thumb over knuckles that seemed too sharp and prominent. Had she lost weight recently? Was that another warning sign I had missed in my polite deference to her privacy? "I'm here, Rachel," I whispered, the promise a fierce protective mantra, "and I'm not going anywhere." At 3 o'clock, a hospital administrator with a carefully neutral expression appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Hayes, there's a call for you at the nurses' station, a Mr. Blackwood asking about his wife's condition." My pulse quickened, a shot of adrenaline sharpening my senses. So he was checking in, maintaining the appearance of the concerned husband from afar, building his alibi, dotting his I's. I nodded and followed her to the desk, taking a deep, steadying breath before picking up the phone. "This is Margaret Hayes." "Margaret." Ethan's voice was a warm, concerned balm, perfectly modulated, exactly as a worried, loving husband should sound. "I just heard about Rachel. I'm on my way back now. I had to wrap up this Vegas conference. It was unavoidable. How is she? Is she okay?" The casual, effortless lie about a conference infuriated me, but 35 years of courtroom experience had taught me how to mask my own emotions, how to build a cage of calm around the roaring beast of my anger. "She's in a medically induced coma, Ethan," I said, my tone even tinged with just the right amount of sorrow. "Apparently she's been suffering from appendicitis symptoms for 2 weeks. Did you not notice your wife was seriously ill before you left for your conference?" There was a beat of silence, a fractional pause that told me he was recalibrating his story. "She mentioned some stomach pain," he said, his voice laced with regret. "But she insisted it was just stress from the Harrington case. You know how stubborn she can be about things like that, always pushing herself too hard." Another lie, a masterful one. He was already spinning the narrative, painting Rachel as the author of her own misfortune. I knew for a fact she hadn't worked on the Harrington case in over a year. "When exactly did you leave town, Ethan?" I asked, my voice still deceptively gentle. "The doctors say she was alone when she collapsed." His voice cooled slightly, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. "Wednesday morning. Look, Margaret, I feel absolutely terrible about this. If I had known for a second that she was actually sick, I never would have left. You have to believe that." "Of course," I said, injecting just enough weary sympathy into my voice to sound convincing. "It's just been such a shock. Finding her phone on the kitchen floor, realizing she'd been here in the hospital for days without any family knowing." Her phone was on the floor. Now he sounded genuinely surprised, a crack in his smooth facade. Yes, cracked screen, dead battery right by the refrigerator. That's odd, he mused. She never lets that phone out of her sight. A short pause. Well, I'm landing around 11 tonight. I'll come straight to the hospital. I needed time. Time for Samantha's team to get into position. Time to get my hands on whatever was on that flash drive. Time to prepare for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. Actually, I said carefully, I've already arranged for a hotel room for you near the hospital. You must be exhausted after your business trip. I can stay with Rachel tonight, and you can take over in the morning when you're rested. That's very thoughtful of you, Margaret, Ethan said, though I could detect a new note of suspicion in his voice. He wasn't used to me being thoughtful. He was used to me being wary. Text me the hotel details and I'll head there first. After we hung up, I immediately texted Samantha. Subject heading straight to hospital tonight despite my suggestion otherwise. Need surveillance in place immediately. Her response came back in seconds. Already arranged. Team in place by 9:00 p.m. Flash drive retrieved. Courier is bringing it to you now. By 6 o'clock, the small silver flash drive was in my hand. I plugged it into my laptop with trembling fingers, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I entered the password Sophie June 2011, and my blood ran cold as dozens of meticulously organized folders appeared on the screen. Rachel had been documenting everything. There were photographs of bruises dated and annotated with her cool clinical explanations of how they happened. There were audio recordings of arguments, conversations where Ethan's charming public facade slipped away to reveal a man capable of vicious, soul-destroying verbal abuse. There were screenshots of text messages that laid bare his controlling, manipulative behavior. And there were financial records detailing how he had been systematically draining their accounts for months. But it was the folder labeled simply "Insurance" that held the true horror. Inside was a single audio file. It was a recorded phone conversation between Ethan and someone he called Marcus, discussing in chillingly casual terms how long it would take for accidental thallium poisoning to appear natural if administered in small, gradual doses over a period of weeks. My daughter hadn't just been abused. She hadn't just been controlled. She had been living with someone who was actively, methodically plotting her death. As I stared at the screen in abject horror, a soft sound from the bed made me turn. Rachel's fingers were twitching against the white blanket. Her eyelids fluttered a faint, almost imperceptible movement as she began the long, slow journey back to consciousness. I quickly closed the laptop and moved to her side, my hand flying to press the call button for the nurse. "I'm here, Rachel," I whispered, my voice choked with a terrifying mix of relief and rage as I squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe, and he will never ever hurt you again." The days following Ethan's arrest passed in a disorienting blur of medical treatments, police statements, and the initial whirlwind of legal proceedings. My arm wound, while painful, was thankfully superficial, requiring only stitches and a course of antibiotics to ward off infection. Rachel's recovery was a far more complicated and arduous journey. The chelation therapy to remove the thallium from her system was a brutal process, leaving her nauseated and profoundly weak, a physical echo of the poison that had been insidiously working its way through her for months. Her doctors, however, assured us that the long-term prognosis was excellent. They had caught it in time. What surprised me most, though, perhaps it shouldn't have, was the immediate and intense media attention. Despite our most strenuous attempts to keep the situation private, the arrest of Ethan Blackwood, prominent real estate developer, celebrated philanthropist, and husband of rising legal star Rachel Hayes Blackwood, for the attempted murder of his wife, made headlines across New England. The story was a perfect storm of wealth, betrayal, and violence. Prominent businessman charged in poisoning plot against attorney wife. Domestic violence advocate thwarts murder for insurance scheme. The secret life of Ethan Blackwood. Abuse, poison, and attempted murder. Our private agony became public consumption. Our trauma reduced to sensational boldface type. 3 days after the hospital confrontation, I sat in Rachel's room, reading through the preliminary witness statements for the upcoming hearing while she slept, the first truly peaceful sleep I'd seen her have. The door opened quietly, and Alexander Chen entered his arms laden with legal folders, his face etched with a mixture of professional focus and personal concern. "How is she?" he asked, his voice low as he set the files on the side table. "Better today," I replied. "The doctors say she can go home tomorrow, though not to her house. There are too many memories there." Alex nodded, understanding immediately. "She'll stay with you for now, of course. I've already set up the guest room. Samantha's team has installed a new security system and arranged for regular patrols of the neighborhood." He glanced at my bandaged arm. "And how are you holding up Margaret?" I considered the question with a stark honesty I rarely allowed myself. At 62, I had expected to be enjoying a quiet retirement, perhaps traveling or finally taking up painting. Instead, I was preparing to testify against my daughter's would-be murderer while helping her navigate the treacherous aftermath of months of systematic abuse. "I'm angry." I admitted the word, feeling wholly inadequate. "Not just at Ethan, I'm angry at myself. I knew something was wrong months ago. I should have pushed harder, been more insistent." Alex shook his head, his expression firm. "Don't go down that road, Margaret. You did more than most would have. You set up contingency plans, you created a safety net. When the moment of crisis came, you were ready. But was I?" I gestured to the sleeping form of my daughter, so small and fragile in the large hospital bed. "Look at what she endured while I was so busy being respectful of her privacy." "Mom?" Rachel's voice, still weak, but clearer than it had been just days ago, interrupted our conversation. Her eyes were open, lucid, and intelligent. "Alex is right. You can't blame yourself." I moved to her bedside, adjusting her pillows as she struggled to sit up. "How much of that did you hear?" "Enough," she said, reaching for a glass of water, her hand trembling slightly. "You taught me everything about recognizing the patterns of abuse, about helping victims escape. But being the victim, it's different. The shame, the self-doubt, the insidious way he made me question my own reality. Even knowing everything I knew professionally, I couldn't see it clearly when it was happening to me." Alex pulled a chair closer to her bed, shifting into his role as her legal counsel. "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week," he began gently. "Given the evidence, the toxicology report, the recorded conversations from the flash drive, the financial paper trail, and of course the hospital incident itself, the DA is confident about moving forward with multiple felony charges." Rachel nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "And bail?" "Denied," I assured her. Ethan's flight risk combined with the violent nature of the crime made that an easy decision for the judge. "He's not getting out, Rachel. Not now, not ever." She exhaled a shaky breath, a small measure of tension leaving her shoulders. "His family has hired Preston Thornfield." Alex and I exchanged a knowing glance. Thornfield was one of Boston's most aggressive and notorious defense attorneys, a man known for his scorched earth approach to cross-examination, particularly of female victims. "We expected that," I said carefully. "The Blackwoods will throw every resource they have at protecting the family name. But they can't change the facts. Ethan was caught literally gun in hand after breaking into your hospital room moments after you were found to have been systematically poisoned with thallium." "It's not the facts I'm worried about," Rachel admitted, her voice low. "It's the narrative. Thornfield will paint me as an unstable, career-obsessed wife who imagined the abuse. He'll suggest I poisoned myself for attention or financial gain. He'll portray you as an overbearing, meddling mother who never accepted her daughter's husband." She wasn't wrong. I had seen that exact strategy play out in courtrooms countless times. It was a brutal, effective tactic designed to attack the victim's credibility, mental stability, and motives, turning the trial into an indictment of her character. It was why so many domestic violence cases never even made it to a courtroom. The prospect of such a public evisceration was simply too daunting for most survivors to endure. "Let him try," Alex said, his voice hard as steel. "The physical evidence is overwhelming, and we have a trump card. Marcus Delgado has already agreed to testify against Ethan in exchange for immunity." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. "Marcus flipped." I nodded. Samantha's team picked him up the morning after Ethan's arrest. When they presented him with the recorded conversations and the potential for charges of conspiracy to commit murder, he became remarkably cooperative. "According to Marcus," Alex continued, Ethan's plan was to gradually increase the thallium dosage until you were hospitalized with a mysterious, undiagnosable illness. He would then advocate for increasingly aggressive and ultimately fatal treatments, all while appearing to the world as the devoted, tragically concerned husband. Rachel shuddered the clinical description of the plot to end her life a fresh horror. "The perfect crime," she whispered. "If I hadn't found that flash drive." "But you did," I reminded her, my voice fierce with pride. "Your instincts and your intelligence saved your life, Rachel. Even while being poisoned and abused, you fought back. You gathered evidence, you documented everything, you created an escape plan." A nurse entered then to check Rachel's vitals, the quiet efficiency of her work, a temporary halt to our grim conversation. As she worked, I studied my daughter's face. It was thinner, yes, and there were dark shadows under her eyes, but I could see a growing spark of her old determination returning, a resilience that Ethan had tried and failed to extinguish. When we were alone again, Rachel broached a subject I had been avoiding. "His parents called me yesterday." I stiffened. "The Blackwoods contacted you, how I had your number changed." "Through the hospital's main line," she explained. "They claimed they had no idea about Ethan's behavior, that they were horrified. They wanted to see me to apologize in person." She twisted the thin bedsheet between her fingers. I said no. "Good," I said firmly. "Whatever their intentions, whether genuine or strategic, now is not the time." Rachel nodded. "That's what I thought, but there's something else." She hesitated as if weighing the importance of her next words. "Eleanor Blackwood, his mother, she mentioned that Ethan has a history, incidents in college, a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend that was mysteriously dropped." Alex leaned forward, instantly alert, the scent of a legal breakthrough in the air. "Did she provide details? Names, dates?" "No," Rachel said. "She said she would only share that information in person. I think she's afraid of something, or someone." I exchanged a long, meaningful glance with Alex. We both recognized the potential significance of this revelation. If Ethan had a documented history of abuse, a pattern of behavior that had been covered up, it would demolish the defense's inevitable claim that Rachel's accusations were unprecedented, a sudden fabrication from a troubled mind. "I'll have Samantha look into it immediately," I promised. "College records, old police reports, court filings. If there's a paper trail, she'll find it." "In the meantime," Alex added, standing up, "we should prepare for your discharge tomorrow. Margaret, is your house ready?" "Almost," I said. "Samantha's team is installing the last of the security cameras today. The guest room is set up with a hospital bed for Rachel's comfort, and I've arranged for a visiting nurse to help with the chelation treatments." Rachel's expression softened with a gratitude so profound it brought tears to my eyes. "You've thought of everything. That's what mothers do." I replied simply, the words feeling like the truest thing I had ever said. Later that evening, long after Alex had left with promises to return for Rachel's discharge in the morning, my daughter and I sat together in a companionable silence. The television murmured softly in the background, some mindless cooking show that neither of us was really watching. I was reviewing police reports, and Rachel was dozing intermittently, the exhaustion of her ordeal still a heavy weight upon her. During one of her wakeful periods, she turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Mom," she began, her voice soft. "Do you remember what you said to me on the day I graduated from law school, about why you became a domestic violence attorney?" I set aside the file I'd been reviewing, the memory clear as day. "I said that the law is supposed to protect the vulnerable, but too often it ends up protecting the powerful instead, and that someone needs to stand in that gap. You've stood in that gap for hundreds of women over your career," Rachel said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "But what you did for me, putting yourself between me and a loaded gun, that was something else entirely." "It was the same thing, really," I replied, my gaze meeting hers, standing in the gap, just a bit more literally than usual. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first genuine one I'd seen in what felt like an eternity. "When I'm stronger," she said, a new resolve hardening her voice, "when this is all over, I want to redirect my practice. I want to move from corporate law to domestic violence advocacy. I want to use what happened to me to help others." Pride swelled in my chest, a fierce, brilliant wave that washed away some of the lingering anger and fear. This was the Rachel I knew, This was my daughter turning her trauma into purpose, her pain into a plan of action. Your father would be so incredibly proud of you, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. He always said you had my stubbornness and his unwavering sense of justice. I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately, she admitted, wondering what he would have done if he'd been here. If he would have seen the warning signs with Ethan sooner than I did. He might have, I acknowledged. Your father had an uncanny ability to read people. But what matters is that when it counted, you fought back. You survived. And now you're going to thrive. Rachel reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Because of you, she said, her eyes locking with mine. Because you answered when I couldn't call. Because you came when I couldn't reach out. Because you fought when I couldn't even stand. As night settled over the hospital, I watched my daughter finally drift into a deep, peaceful sleep, free at last from the fear that had shadowed her life for so long. Tomorrow would bring a new set of challenges: the move to my home, the continuation of her medical treatments, the daunting preparation for the trial that loomed ahead. But tonight, in this quiet, shared moment, I allowed myself to feel not just the crushing weight of what had happened, but the profound triumph of what we had overcome together. Ethan Blackwood had tried to destroy my daughter through isolation, manipulation, and poison. He had very nearly succeeded. But in his arrogant, calculated malice, he had failed to account for one critical, immutable factor: that the bond between a mother and her daughter, once fully awakened, could prove more powerful and more ferocious than even the most carefully constructed evil. 6 months after Ethan's arrest, I stood in the doorway of my home office, watching Rachel prepare for court. She moved with a renewed confidence, the last physical effects of the poisoning having finally faded. Her hair had grown back thicker, her complexion had regained its healthy glow, and most importantly, the sharp, brilliant intelligence in her eyes was no longer clouded with doubt or fear. "How do I look?" she asked, smoothing the lapels of her charcoal gray suit, not one from the wardrobe Ethan had so carefully selected for her, but a new one she had chosen herself. "Strong," I answered truthfully, "ready." Today marked the start of Ethan's trial. The preliminary hearings had been brutal, with Preston Thornfield living up to his reputation for aggressive, victim-blaming tactics. As Rachel had predicted, he had attempted to paint her as emotionally unstable, career-obsessed, and manipulated by an overbearing mother. But the prosecution's evidence was a mountain he could not move. The toxicology reports, the financial records, Marcus Delgado's damning testimony, and the final irrefutable proof of the security footage showing Ethan entering Rachel's hospital room with a gun. What had tipped the scales definitively in our favor, however, was Eleanor Blackwood's unexpected cooperation. After our initial refusal to meet, she had approached the prosecution, directly providing them with the documented proof of Ethan's previously buried history: 3 ex-girlfriends with eerily similar experiences of escalating control and violence incidents that had been carefully concealed through family connections and quiet financial settlements. "Are you nervous?" I asked, helping Rachel gather the notes for her testimony. "Oddly, no," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "I've spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment. I know exactly who Ethan is now. I know what he did, and I know how he operates. There's a strange kind of power in that clarity." I understood completely. Rachel had undergone intensive therapy over the past months, painstakingly working through the deep psychological impact of Ethan's abuse. The process had been painful, but it had also been transformative. I had watched her journey from victim to survivor and now to advocate. Her natural resilience, so long suppressed, was reasserting itself stronger than ever. The courthouse steps were a chaotic swarm of reporters and cameras. Alexander met us at a side entrance, escorting us efficiently through the crush and into a private waiting room. "The prosecution will call you first, Rachel," he explained, reviewing the day's strategy one final time. "They want to establish the timeline of abuse before they introduce the medical and financial evidence. Margaret, you'll likely be called to the stand tomorrow." Rachel squeezed my hand. "We've got this." When the bailiff came to escort her to the courtroom, she stood tall, her shoulders back, her chin lifted. Gone was any trace of the frightened, broken woman I had found in the hospital 6 months ago. In her place stood a warrior prepared to speak her truth without shame or fear. I took my seat in the front row of the courtroom directly behind the prosecution's table. Across the aisle, the Blackwood family occupied the first row behind the defense. When Ethan was finally led in, I studied him objectively. He had lost weight in pretrial detention, his expensive designer suits replaced by a conservative court-appropriate outfit. But his demeanor remained arrogant, his expression confident as he surveyed the room. When his eyes found mine, he held my gaze for a long moment, a flicker of pure hatred in their depths, before he turned away. Then Rachel entered. She didn't look at Ethan not once. She focused instead on the prosecutor as she was sworn in and took her seat at the witness stand. What followed was one of the most powerful and courageous displays I had ever witnessed in my 35 years in the legal profession. For nearly 3 hours, Rachel calmly and precisely detailed the progression of her relationship with Ethan, from the charming whirlwind courtship to the subtle control to the outright abuse, and finally to the poisoning that had nearly killed her. Her testimony was measured meticulous and devoid of any dramatic embellishment, which only made it all the more deeply affecting in its clarity. When Thornfield rose for his cross-examination, the entire courtroom tensed. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began, his tone deceptively conversational, "you've painted quite a picture of my client. Yet you remained in the marriage. You continued to post happy photos on social media. Why would an accomplished, intelligent attorney with abundant personal resources choose to stay in such a supposedly dangerous situation?" Rachel met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Thornfield," she replied, her voice clear and strong, "I assume you have never personally experienced the insidious nature of domestic abuse. If you had, you would understand that it is rarely a sudden, obvious event. It is incremental. It's a slow erosion of self-confidence, a process of isolation punctuated by intermittent reinforcement through affection and gifts. By the time I fully recognized the danger I was in, my self-confidence had been systematically undermined, and I was being slowly poisoned, which, as the medical experts will confirm, significantly affects cognitive function. For over 2 hours, Thornfield tried every tactic in his dirty playbook to undermine her credibility. But each time Rachel responded with calm, unshakable clarity, never rising to his provocations, never wavering from her truth. By the time she was excused from the stand, the courtroom had fallen into a hushed reverence. As Rachel returned to her seat beside me, I saw Eleanor Blackwood quietly weeping in the family section. Our eyes met across the aisle, and I saw in her gaze a terrible soul-crushing recognition, the knowledge that she had seen these same warning signs in her son years ago and had chosen to ignore them to protect him, to believe his excuses. The weight of that complicity was now finally crushing her. That evening, as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, the exhaustion of the day settled around us. "I've been offered a position," Rachel said quietly, breaking the silence, "with the district attorney's domestic violence unit, starting once the trial concludes." I turned to her, surprised but deeply pleased. "You're leaving corporate law for good?" She nodded. "It feels right, to use what happened, what I've learned, to help others." She hesitated for a moment. "Actually, I was hoping you might consider consulting for the unit. Your experience would be invaluable. We could even work cases together." The idea was unexpectedly appealing. Since my retirement, I had missed the sense of purpose my career had given me. To work alongside my daughter, to watch her transform her trauma into a force for advocacy, it would be the most meaningful work of my life. "I'll think about it." I promised, though in my heart, I had already decided. As darkness settled around us, Rachel reached for my hand. "When I was little," she said softly, "you used to tell me that story about the mother bear who moved mountains to protect her cub." I smiled at the memory. "Your father thought it was too violent for a bedtime story. But I loved it," she said. "It made me feel safe knowing my mother would fight that fiercely for me." She squeezed my hand. "I just never imagined how literally true it would turn out to be." We sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The trial would continue for weeks, and despite the strength of our case, nothing was guaranteed. But in that moment, those concerns felt distant. What mattered was this: my daughter was alive, she was healing, and she was reclaiming her power. The cycle of abuse that had nearly claimed her life had been broken, and our bond, which had been tested and strained, had emerged stronger and more profound than ever. "It's strange," Rachel murmured, looking up at the night sky. "For so long I felt like I was drowning. Now, now I feel possibilities. A future I'm actually looking forward to." "That's what healing looks like," I told her, my heart swelling. "It's not the absence of scars, it's the presence of hope." She smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes and lit up her whole face. "I like that," she said. "Maybe we can put that on the brochure when we start our mother-daughter consulting firm." I laughed, putting my arm around her shoulders as we walked back inside. "Let's get through this trial first," I said, "one mountain at a time." As I closed the door behind us, I felt a deep and abiding sense of peace. The agreement born of fear had served its purpose. Now it was time to forge a new one built not on contingency plans, but on strength, purpose, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to my story. It's a story about the darkest parts of human nature, but I hope it's also a story about resilience, about the fierce love that can pull us back from the brink, and about the quiet strength it takes to find your voice again. If you or someone you know is in a situation that feels unsafe or controlling, please know that you are not alone and there is help available. Sharing our stories is one of the most powerful things we can do. If you feel moved to do so, please like this video, subscribe for more stories of survival and hope, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. And in the comments, I'd be honored if you would share a story of a time when someone stood in the gap for you, or when you found the strength to stand for yourself. Your stories matter.